Yeah, so the hay bale actually fell off the truck and crushed 3 sheep, and no one stopped. And that's the worst thing that happened yesterday on the drive up from Dallas.
So at what point in the podcast were you when that happened?
I was on season 2, episode 19 of Star Trek: The Greatest Generation podcast.
Oh, I thought you were talking about a different podcast, but go ahead
No,
with your Star Trek.
No.
Oh,
Just kidding.
he does have a point, Ryan.
Yes. If you haven't heard, there's a new podcast at Splunk.
Is it about Star Trek?
It's not, but we could try to find some ties to Star Trek, right? I mean, everything kind of ties back to it, but yeah, this is called the Security Detail. Before we get into any news, we wanted to just quick promote this. We just launched a podcast with the Surge team. It's called the Security Detail. It's about the cyber threat landscape in different industries. So each episode is a different industry. We've so far covered the public sector, telecommunications, manufacturing, and we have 2 more episodes coming out in August about the retail and hospitality sector and also healthcare, which were great interviews. I'm really looking forward to release them. And this is Kirsty Payne and myself. We take turns interviewing different experts, whether they're CISOs or ISAC leaders, people that are very knowledgeable about that particular vertical. And so far, it's been very educational. We have a QR code in case you want to.
Let's also say entertaining and fun.
Entertaining, yes, and fun. Yes, because that's the first word I would use to describe.
Just saying, it is fun.
It is fun. It is very fun. So yeah, we have a QR code. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, a bunch of other platforms, and the link
and the
is on
rest
there.
was just
Yeah, and others.
It's
a fun time. Kirsty Payne, like you said, friend of the show. She's been a guest host a couple times. You guys do global audiences, and then tell us about my favorite section, the CISO Say So. What's that all about?
Oh yeah, so this was Kirsty's idea because Kirsty is who brings the fun to the podcast, right? So Kirsty came up with the idea of I'm the CISO, I say so, where we ask our interview guests what they would recommend or even mandate if they were a CISO of the industry that they're speaking about. So we have lots of really, really good answers to that particular question. So yeah, that's one of the segments that we have in the show.
Well, there we go. Breaking news. Thanks for everyone for coming today. I think are we done?
Done with the show?
Done?
Yeah. All right. I'll see you guys later.
All right. That was all we wanted to talk about.
But... No, sorry, Mick. You have to work for the rest of the day. As always, first time joining. Hopefully you're putting up with us. This is Coffee Talk with Surge. I'm Ryan Kovar, Mick Baccio, Audra Streetman. We're going to do about 30 to 45 minutes of Mick and I not being serious and Audra actually talking about things that matter.
We'll see how it goes today.
Yeah. Today we have some, we're going to talk a bit about Microsoft logging. We're going to talk about angry senators. We're going to talk about the SEC won't let me be. Mick and I are going to debate some of the things for Defcon in the summer, and then we'll finish off with Mick telling us about the MSS. So I think we have some exciting things to talk about. I'm on location here in Denver, Colorado, in former Surge member Dave Harrell's basement, where he's locked me in for the duration. So that's the explanation for the new background. And I think with that, Drew Church, let's roll clip.
All right, so we have a new critical vulnerability to talk about that came out in the last few days that CISA actually issued an advisory about today. This is in coordination with the Norwegian National Cybersecurity Center. We're talking about Ivanti and its Endpoint Manager Mobile, which is formerly known as Mobile Iron Core, if you're familiar. So this new vulnerability, it's a 0-day, or was a 0-day when it was exploited in order to target 12 Norwegian government ministries. So that's where we first learned of this being used in the wild, and it's since been observed in other cases as well. The CVE is 2023-35078. It has a 10 CVSS score, which is the highest possible score, so very critical. And it allows for unauthenticated access to specific API paths, which could then allow threat actors to leverage personal information like names, phone numbers, other mobile device details of different users. They could also make configuration changes, push new packages to mobile endpoints, and then also access GPS data if it's enabled. So obviously very concerning if that's the case. And there, another interesting point is that you can actually chain this vulnerability with a second vulnerability to allow for directory traversal in EPMM, the product. And so that could give threat actors, if they have administrative privileges, they could then write arbitrary files like web shells, for instance. They could have operating system privileges of the EPMM web application server and then execute any file that they upload. So this is being actively exploited. There is a patch available though. So if you have not patched, patch as soon as possible. And our threat research team at Splunk is also tracking this vulnerability. And they have an analytic story that they just posted on GitHub. And I will share the link in the chat for this if anyone is interested in looking at it. So yeah, that is what we, oh wait, yep, that is the GitHub. Hopefully that URL works. I may have combined. Yeah. I may have combined two URLs.
Is that a referral link? Is that what that is?
Yeah, that is a Google. That's a Google.
Also,
all right.
Can we talk about Ivanti? This sounds like a Europop DJ. I assume they're going to be crushing Glastonbury this year. Johan is actually going to be attending their concert later on today.
So I think what's interesting, and for the folks at home that aren't familiar, the CVSS score that Audra mentioned, that's 10, it's on a scale of 10. So it's not like this can get much worse. And honestly, we're only about a week into this, tops, that's really been public. So to your point, we've seen it target, 12 Norwegian states or departments. And then I think it's going to be repurposed by those cracked versions of Cobalt Strike we were talking about earlier that are such a big problem. But it's pretty novel. And a shout out to the threat research team, Michael Haig and the gang over there for staying on top of this. And I think this is going to be unique and going to be a little bit more widespread and keep going for a while.
Yeah, and I can't remember what news site it was. It was one of the cybersecurity news sites had an article, and they were talking about exposed instances from Shodan. And I think it was like nearly 3,000 or something exposed instances of EPMM. So just
but they're
whatever
endpoints,
that's worth.
Right? So they're supposed to be exposed.
Right. But just to give an example of like how commonly used it is, because that's what that's my first question when we hear about a critical vulnerability is like, how popular is this? Who uses it? Because that makes a big difference. Is it government agencies?
The big thing there is, for those who don't know Ivanti, as I did not, you may know it as its previous name, the company known as Mobile Iron, right? So I know you brought that up earlier, but I think it's important to point out, like, I had never heard of Ivanti, but it was acquired. Mobile Iron was acquired by Ivanti earlier. So I know I've installed and put Mobile Iron previously.
Many a device.
It's sitting there and probably not updated. So take a look.
Okay. Yeah, I found the link. It's actually 2,300 accessible Mobile Iron user portals that are exposed on the internet, including over a dozen linked to U.S. local and state government agencies. So that's the kind of information that puts into perspective what's at risk with a vulnerability like this. So,
this would be the basically it's your MDM type for your phones. So all of that data. So and that's the weird thing, right? Because we were talking about this earlier. How do we talk about this? Because mobile data isn't really something you collect regularly, is it?
Well,
you really can't.
If you're the NSO, you do.
That's fair. Yeah. That's pretty good.
I think the answer here is you should actually purchase NSO software to get better logging on phones. Eva was telling me about it the other week. She said it's really effective. It's a great way to capture. You even get.
I believe I saw that in the affidavit as well. Yeah.
I wasn't paying attention to the whole conversation. It was very loud, but I'm pretty sure Eva said use NSO to get logs.
Yep. And we
just break Audra? I think we just broke Audra.
I think my brain just stopped working for a minute, but
10 minutes in, we're good.
We're on a great track for this. Oh man. Should we move on to our next story? Did you want to keep talking about MDM?
The only thing I'd say that Mick kind of hit on is, and actually our lovely production elf Drew Church brought up as well. Like, a lot of people aren't looking at these types of appliances. So like, even if you can't get logs off the mobile phone, as Mick pointed out, like being able to get logs off of the devices that are managing it is a really great way to get that visibility. So even if you haven't looked at mobile iron before or your MDM, obviously we work with Splunk, so we have a bias, but like that is, I go full mornings without getting on my laptop because I'm able to do my job on my phone. I open PDFs, I open documents. Like the new computing platform is people's, $1,000 pocket computer. So
yeah. Or if your company wants to install MDM on your personal phone, that's a whole nother conversation, but something to think about.
I'm pretty sure you recommended it, and you also said once again put NSO Group on there. So
exactly, those were my two recommendations. But all right, well, let's move on to the SEC. So the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission recently voted 3-2 to adopt new rules on cybersecurity disclosures. And so these new rules, they go into effect on December 1st, and they require any public company to disclose a cybersecurity incident within 4 business days of, and this is important, determining that the incident is material. So the goal of this is to provide information to investors to inform them of any potential risk when they make investment decisions. And public companies, they also have to disclose how their board of directors are going to oversee cybersecurity risk, and then also their collective expertise in the area of cybersecurity. And I have seen some concerns. Some people think this is, moving one step in the right direction. I'm curious what both of you think about this. But there was some concern that, like, if a company has to disclose this within this window of just, several days, and there's still, an intrusion going on, like if they haven't confirmed that this is cleared from their systems and they're still actively investigating, because it can take more than 4 days to investigate an incident, right? That could harm the company further by releasing public details. But the SEC says that companies will not be penalized if they disclose an incident beyond the 4 days, because if they have a reasonable basis for believing that it's not material, which material is that special word.
That word is carrying a lot of...
what does that mean? It means it's significant, it's known, it's confirmed.
It will impact the financial bottom line of the company, and that affects stock price. It is material difference to the shareholders, and that is going to be in the eye of the beholder.
Right.
And the lifting that, because we're all focusing on it. Just that one word, material, like the amount of lifting that word is doing in the sentence is just...
Well, and we went through this before, like how many companies have been material, like is that long-term or short-term? Like how many companies have materially been infected by a breach over 5 years?
I mean, define like material how, okay? Like did it impact operations to a grinding halt, like a ransomware incident?
Well, earlier you said stock price, the shareholders, right?
So, right.
But it's like if you had an incident, and like, are there ways you could blur that line in order to not report it, to delay reporting it?
I mean,
because
I'm not going to say that in previous life that there were defined words around incident.
Well, I'm 100% saying that. Like, there is when you devil's in the details, right? And we'll see how this works out. And I am hopeful that it does. I think because it is very new, a lot of people are still digesting it. And by people, I mean mostly legal teams across the country.
Yep.
And if you are going to be at Defcon next week, make sure you stop by the Policy Village. I know there's going to be a lot of chatter around this. And I'm really, really curious to see where it goes, because that word material is going to impact a lot of the responses from the companies that fall under the umbrella.
Yeah, and I don't know if there's, I mean, if you compare it to like the TSA guidelines that came out for pipelines, when they kind of had a lot of definitions for version 1 and then had to roll it back in version 2. Like I like prescriptive things because the material is so nebulous. And as we said in a previous life, like how you do, like, for example, can a junior SOC analyst determine if something is a material, like who is the one who says, right, declare bankruptcy?
I think that's the point, though. Like that really gray area, which stinks for the responders, but from a legal perspective, cool, especially at the time. I am, to your point about the regulation getting rolled back, the SEC, I am super impressed always by the amount of flex they have, just as a gov agency.
Well, they did this kind of like like we're not going to have.
We're doing it, and guess what? You're following it.
We don't care. Congress, whatever. Nope. The SEC.
There you go.
Eminem wrote a song about us. Okay, we're good.
So if you get hit by
Either way, there's something there. There's a song.
If you get hit with ransomware and you have a ransomware message pop up on all of your computers and you can't access your data, that's material, right? I mean, there's no question about
I don't know
that there's a problem that is a cybersecurity incident.
What if it didn't hit your servers and your primary business continues to go happily along?
What if it hit a branch office and, Bumblestick Nevertown, and your headquarters was not affected at all because your savvy network engineers,
or you have disaster recovery enabled. So okay, yeah, fine. But we were able to roll that back in an hour.
How often does that happen though?
Listen, we would never know.
I just am curious. I've never been part of a incident response team. So, the timelines involved. Mick and Ryan, the lawyers.
Sea lawyers, I think you'll find any enlisted sailor who got out at E5 or so becomes very good at knowing all the rules and regulations. You hit on ransomware is the delta there, I think, because it does. I mean, that's why everyone talks about it, is because it tells you you're not getting paid unless you say something. But for the majority of incidents, I do think there's going to be I do wonder if this will cause negative behavior in terms of internal reporting. A CISO doesn't have to report a material incident unless someone tells him it's a material incident.
Yeah. And we were talking about this too with 2 recent ransomware incidents where people involved made public statements at their own free will to acknowledge that they made a ransom payment. And I thought that was super interesting. It was Community College of Hawaii and then also a mayor in New Jersey. And this was just in the last few days that both of these stories came out. And I thought it was interesting. And I'd be curious to know, I don't know if anyone's tracking, the rate at which there's public acknowledgement of ransomware attacks and whether or not a company decided to pay the ransom, because that's obviously very difficult to measure. But if we're seeing an increase in transparency about that, even before this goes into effect, I'd be curious,
But is this paying ransomware?
No, but a ransomware falls under the umbrella of cybersecurity incident. So I just don't know, as things become more pervasive, right? As more companies become aware of the threat of ransomware, will they be more open to sharing that information if other companies are doing the same? I don't know. It doesn't seem like it'd be in their interest.
I thought we were doing the thing where, hey, you can't pay ransomware operators. There is legal.
Well, that's the thing. Admitting that you paid, just on your own, admitting oh, by the way, we paid this. And the way that it was worded for the community college was because of what was at stake with personal data being released. So they said, we paid these operators in order to protect your data from public release. And that's how they worded it, as if they were doing, protecting their students and whatnot and their staff. So it's interesting.
We were having, because all the best ideas are always mine and I do everything on the team. So it's rare for me to give credit back. But in this one case, I will say, there's a discussion I was having the other day with Kirsty of your podcast fame about Varus framework and how there isn't a anonymous reporting. If there was a service where you could just send in yeah, we paid, this is how much, we don't want to be attributed, but here's the real data, here's the real economic. Because right now you can get bits and pieces of that from Inferment, when Lockbit posts oh, here's the places that got popped, and then they disappear off that list. Did they pay, or did the ransomware operators just disappear that?
Yeah,
exercise.
There was a report that I saw, I can't remember where it came out from, but one of their metrics that they had in their report was the percentage of known payments. And one of the findings was that the education sector had a higher percentage of known payments. But then again, it's there's so many unknowns that it's hard to really take that as.
Well, in their public sector, so they probably have different reporting financial than a private sector.
And a greater immediate impact.
Yeah. Would you say in a material impact?
That's not for me. I practice a different law. I am a fronting lawyer and only that. So I couldn't speak to.
I see. This falls into incident response law, which you were just not as. It's
strictly the fronting. Strictly the fronting.
Cool. What else do we have today, Audra?
So we have an update on the the hack of Microsoft Cloud tools that led to the compromise of several email accounts that were tied to U.S. officials, including the Commerce Secretary and also the ambassador to China. And this happened right before these officials planned to travel to China. So the timing is interesting. This was back in June. And the threat actor is also believed to be linked to the Chinese government. So U.S. Senator Ron Wyden, who's probably the most involved member of Congress with regard to cybersecurity, wouldn't you say? He's a Democrat from Oregon. He's now calling on the Department of Justice, the Federal Trade Commission, and CISA to investigate Microsoft's security practices following this attack. And he even went so far to say that the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, should, quote, examine whether Microsoft's negligent practices violated federal law. So using the word negligent is obviously a very strong word. And then also, investigating whether or not this was actually violated the U.S. law. And the other interesting point about this, too, is that researchers over at Wiz came out with a report, I think it was 2 Fridays ago, where they found that this attack could have actually been much bigger than what was initially reported because the access token that they were able to steal, the threat actors, could actually be used to access a variety of Azure programs. And Microsoft initially responded to this and called it, speculative and not evidence-based. But then Wiz said that the blog that they posted was reviewed and validated by Microsoft's Security Response Center team. And so then Microsoft kind of backtracked and basically said, well, we're not observing this in the wild, so it's not proven, but it's a possibility. So I thought that was interesting, this whole back and forth about, because Microsoft was very adamant in that initial Storm 0558 report saying, if you haven't been contacted by us, you are not affected. And that was a very strong statement, like, we have this contained, it was very limited, very targeted. But then to have this report come out and say, well, actually, when you're talking about consumer signing keys, that's could be used for much bigger purposes, right?
I don't really understand how the cloud works. And I honestly don't believe
cloud.
Yeah, I mean, and I say that jokingly, but when you talk to folks in these large cloud service providers, the complexity is so high. So, we're never victim blaming Microsoft here. It is, however, an interesting facet of the new world we're moving to, where categorically, I believe everyone's security is up-leveled by utilizing cloud services. I do fundamentally believe that. However, you lose visibility and you are depending upon someone else's ability to defend your network in something that you may or may not even understand all the way. And partly that's what you're paying for. And so it's hard. I don't envy Microsoft. I don't envy customers who are having to deal with this of what do we do now if we can't do this? Or how do we view this? And would you even, if you had the logs, would you have been able to figure it out? It's hard. This is a hard problem. I don't know if it's negligent, but I also see where they're coming from.
We have been seeing responses from companies over time about breaches and compromises, and whiffing on the first response is not really new or unique to Microsoft. We've seen it a couple times just in the past year, and it's not to give them a pass on this, hey, they really whiffed on this one, but it's to your point, if you're in the cloud, you're kind of beholden to whatever security they have in place, and they really dropped the ball on that. And we're seeing the response for it. I think Senator Wyden is in the right direction. I think some of the concerns are overblown, but at the same time, it does highlight the need for a unified solution from all vendors in the cloud space.
Yeah. And with cloud, you have the shared responsibility model where, the customer is responsible for X, the provider is responsible for X. And in this case, we're talking about advanced persistent threats, nation state activity. This is very sophisticated, right? That's the word we always use. But, to go after a consumer signing key, and it's still unclear how the threat actor got a hold of this, which is, I think, a key part of this, because when we talk about cloud security and securing the cloud, how do you secure this, and why wasn't it secure? Was this like an endpoint attack where they actually got into like an engineer's, machine and then were able to get it that way? That's what I want to find out, because that would kind of
a
reveal.
USB drive in a data center. I mean,
for me, you nailed it, Audra. Like, we talk about APT threats a lot, but most of the time the letter is capital P lowercase a, right? Like, it's usually persistent is the APT, not APT. Like, this is the inverse. Like, this was advanced. Like, this is a hard attack, and they're willing to burn the time and effort for something like, we want to have better understanding of U.S. diplomacy at the top level, and this is a way for us to do that. Like, that is
right. We're not even pulling that thread. That part of the thread is super amazing to me. Who was targeted, what they do inside the U.S. government, and what their plans are. It goes linked to the State Department. These emails of folks or U.S. ambassadors that were heading to China. That your email is compromised. So what do you do now?
PGP.
Yeah.
Is that the answer?
Always PGP.
And it's it's so hard, because when you're talking about these advanced attacks, it's like, if these groups are able to get a hold of one engineer's computer, right? If they're able to get a hold of that just through a phishing email or some simple, initial access method that we always hear about, like credential theft or something, once they have access to that computer, the way that they could then, escalate to something like this. I mean, we saw it with the LinkedIn breach, right? That was an engineer whose machine was compromised, and then it led to one of the largest, data breaches, or leaks of credentials.
We need to start getting a horn for data breaches every time.
Well, credential leak. I mean, that was a big one, and that's how it started. So, is that negligence? I don't know.
We know Mick and I have a bias on this, right? Like, this is the stuff this is why I got into cybersecurity, is the intersection of statecraft and warfare and cyber. And so I just find it, like, your point, like, yeah, it could have been one engineer's computer. It could have been human intelligence. It could have been a honeypot. It could have been a targeted espionage. It could have been blackmail. It could have been all of those things with 15 people, with someone who did like a 3-year op on this. And they said, yep, this is go time. This is when we pull the trigger.
Or it could have been a vulnerability that was mined over the course of several years, understanding their architecture based on stolen IP. Like, it's an amazing thing. But
or it could have been like literally last week, and they're like, we're going to use this or lose it. What do we have up right now? Like,
yeah. And I mean,
I want to read the book.
And to go back to promoting the podcast, we have an interview with the Cloud Security Alliance, and I did this interview before all of this happened, so I didn't have a chance to ask specifically about this incident. But, one of the big takeaways from that interview, and I won't give it all away, but one of the big takeaways is the endpoint is the weakest link. When we're talking about compromise involving the cloud, you go after the weakest link typically, right? And so that would be the endpoint user. So I would not be surprised if that's maybe how this started, but then again, it's really unknown. And if it wasn't an attack like that, that would be really interesting to
it's like getting the center of a Tootsie Pop.
Yep.
So anyway, we can move on and talk about this.
Watching in the background, I've seen a couple people. Hi, Ducky.
Yeah.
Hey, Ducky.
Feel free to ask questions, input your thoughts. Always happy to talk about them. We're unfortunately not on LinkedIn today because of some API issues, but for the folks on Twitch and YouTube, welcome. Hi.
So wait, I guess we're learning over the past month or so, API is the new DNS.
Did we get canceled by Microsoft before we even got on?
Of course, it's a conspiracy.
Oh my God.
They're gonna say what? No, they aren't. No, they're not.
Deep Clippy. We're gonna meet him in a parking lot. He's gonna tell us all the deep, dark secrets.
Okay. Upcoming events, yeah. Should we move on? Because we have Black Hat and Defcon next week, which is kind of crazy. Very excited about it. A few events happening. Oh, and actually, we didn't really talk about this before I finished this slide, Ryan. Is Coffee Talk, it's going to be on Tuesday now, isn't it?
Maybe. It's a little bit, it's kind of like Easter. It's a liturgical feast. It's movable.
Yeah.
We have a room booked for Wednesday. I rebooked the room on Wednesday, but traditionally we do Tuesday. But you know what? We're going to be live at some point next week. I think that's
so Coffee Talk probably Tuesday is what we're thinking, not Wednesday. So that's incorrect, but still TBD. But we're thinking 11 a.m. Pacific on Splunk's LinkedIn and YouTube if we get LinkedIn API access back. And then we also
not
have
after this show.
Oh, right. Whoops.
Fantastic.
Womp, womp, womp,
womp. I can get all the training I want.
Yes. Well, we have a social on Tuesday for Black Hat at Flanker Kitchen and Sports Bar in Las Vegas. Oh, Michael's asking if there will be a live studio audience.
Yeah, we could.
If you show up, there will be. That's you.
Yeah. You want to?
Mick and I are gonna create something new as well. So it will be we're gonna do a very special episode of reviewing some bad television shows. So
right by the shark at Mandalay. We'll be hanging out by that.
Wonderful. Is that Delano? We'll do it in between the two rocks at the Delano. And the sports bar. I think there's karaoke. Audra,
Is there?
will you be doing Tupac?
I've been told there's karaoke, Audra.
Spice Girls. That's my go-to.
This is a little known fact about Audra. She is a 90s hip-hop fiend. Bone Thugs and Harmony.
You mean Queen. I've seen it. You mean Queen. Just kills it every time.
It is.
Thank you. I try.
The memorization just it slays. Absolutely slays. Kelsey Bourne would say.
Slay. Yes. And Mick, do you want to talk about the Bluenomicon book signing that we have on Wednesday?
Sure. So it's going to be me and you and Ryan. I hope someone told you already. And Shannon Davis. And the four of us are going to hang out at the Splunk booth at Black Hat from around 4:30 to 6 o'clock or so. And then kind of hang out, talk about what we do at the Surge team and how we got to be where we are at Black Hat, and a bit about Bluenomicon, and roll right into a book signing. So
this is I think this is our final Bluenomicon event, right?
I don't know, because we're going to be at Defcon immediately after. So if you see us at Black Hat or Defcon next week, we'll probably have a book in our pocket. There's a good chance, or have access to.
Or we'll hold court at Vespers and at the Cosmo and just have a pile of books there. It's
what I'm looking forward to.
Yep.
We'll be able to expense it then because we're working.
So please stop by.
Yep. And we also had the dates for .conf 24 up on there, July 10th through the 13th next year. So we already have that.
Nope.
Yep. We're already planning for that.
No, we're not.
Already 10 months away. We've already lost 2 months. It's so horrible. Get busy.
Right.
Get those comp talks in.
All right, 60-second charity challenge. Let's move on to that.
Which I've prepared for a max.
And now, Splunk Cybersecurity 60-second charity challenge. Remember the rules. You've got to get through an entire subject in 60 seconds, or you donate to today's charity of choice. Good luck.
All right. So
that song slaps. I'm sorry. It's just too good.
It does. It's a bop, I think the kids are saying.
It bops.
No, it's a bop.
Bop.
It's slap.
We also did
It's a bop.
You slap the bop. You know what? Anyway, go on, Audrey.
It's another good karaoke song. On the topic of Defcon and Black Hat, since that is right around the corner, a good charity challenge for today is to summarize what you're looking forward to most, what your biggest advice would be for anyone attending either of the conferences for the first time, regardless of their level of experience or their background in the industry. What would be your best piece of advice? And our charity this week is the Electronic Frontier Foundation. Last week we had an interview with Eva from EFF about data privacy and a number of topics, which was really great to be able to speak with her about that. And with DEF CON and all of that, we think EFF is a perfect charity to donate to this week.
Yeah, I believe the donation goes straight to creation of didactic material for the value benefits of NSO software to secure mobile devices, if I remember correctly. Is that the
Exactly.
I will be avoiding Eva for the whole week, I think, after this.
Data tactic.
Yep. So who wants to go first?
So are we doing this from the original lens where DEF CON is not a hacker conference, or
what is it then?
I have thoughts.
Do we want to get that out of the way? It seems like you really want to talk, Ryan.
No, it's fine.
Get it off your chest.
I can give the helpful hints. I can go through it. I'll work it into the narrative.
Okay.
Who goes first, Audra? You pick.
Well, then I want you should go first.
Great.
I want to hear what you have to say.
All right. Let me build it in my head. Mind Palace. Go for it, Drew. Okay, so the key thing to remember about DEF CON is it is not a cybersecurity conference. And I think that just needs to be shouted from the rooftop. What it is, at best, is a celebration of hacker lifestyles and the 13 people there who are actually developing exploits and doing malicious security work. That doesn't mean it's a bad thing. What I love about DEF CON is full of communities and people who are getting together and celebrating what at one point was a lifestyle in a group that was not acceptable. There's a lot of wonderful things there, and there's wonderful places to go find good information. But if you're a dyed in blue teamer, you may find yourself lacking of talks to go back to your office for actual use. This is a little bit of a controversial opinion, but if you do open your aperture a bit and you go and think about this more as an experience to be able to learn what is possible, make incredible connections, walk the hallways, and most importantly, in my experience, don't go to DEF CON, go to the DEF CON villages, because that's where the best content is, that's most relevant for most people. And I think it's just full of incredible folks.
All right, controversial indeed. We can
Just
talk about
told
that.
everyone to get off your lawn. Is that what I just heard?
Yeah. All right, Mick.
Get off my lawn and go to the wonderful villages.
Yes. Which, Mick, you'll be at one, right? Because you're a goon this year. And
I'm a goon at DEF CON for, I think, going on the 8th year now.
Yeah, you're part of the establishment, bro.
Yes, that's me, the bourgeoisie of DEF CON. That's 100% it. I'm hall monitor extreme. I'll be working Line Con with Ducky, so if you're up at 5 a.m., bring us coffee, please. Like, we're old and tired. And Saturday, I am hanging out with some friends, Silas Cutler, Lauren Prohl, and Charlie Donat from FSISAC at Blue Team Village, moderating a panel on why threat intelligence is maybe worthless or maybe it's you. So come by and find out what we're talking about. So it'll be super good. But yes, Ryan, there's no content at DEF CON. It's fine.
I'm not saying there isn't. It's just, you know.
All right, Mick, let's hear what you have to say for yours.
So contrary to what Old Man Yells at Cloud just said, I think DEF CON is 100% a cybersecurity conference because that's all everyone there does. When you say hacker conference, maybe you're looking for a specific lens inside of that, but it's a hacker conference like Comic-Con's about comics. If you like cybersecurity at all, there's something for you to find there, whether it's offensive, defensive, or something in between. Now, my pro tips as a veteran who's gone there for some time, you're going to hear a lot about the 3-2-1 rule, like 3 hours of sleep, 2 meals, and 2 showers. So, I say 2 showers because it's hot in Vegas. The sweat dries, but the BO does not. And the other thing I recommend is socks. Your feet will thank you. You're going to walk around more than you think and see some awesome content in the cybersecurity field full of people who go there, DEF CON, for cybersecurity.
Bravo. I apologize. My dogs got excited. I don't know if you could hear them.
That was Ryan.
No, my
No,
dogs are passed out and snoring.
Someone was chiming their applause.
My dogs didn't betray me.
All right. Come on.
I just won't let Bruno see me.
All right. Well, so two very different takes is what I meant to say. Again, brain's not working. Is DEF CON a cybersecurity conference? That's what this decision boils down to, wouldn't you say?
I mean, there's been some discussions made. On a side note, I also don't disagree with anything Mick said. I've just seen some people go to DEF CON and been a little disappointed when they didn't have their expectations set to what DEF CON is.
That's fair.
Another thing. You're if you've never been to Vegas and never been to DEF CON, it's not just DEF CON. It's Black Hat. It's DEF CON. It's B-Sides Las Vegas. And this year, I'm really looking forward to Squad Con.
Yep.
So I think that's going to be super awesome when you look at all the new things. It's summer camp. Why it's in the desert, I'm not sure yet. But why it's still in the desert anyway, I'm not sure yet. But there's so much to do in that one space. And, I'm really looking forward to something like Squad Con, what's in its first year. But I remember back when B-Sides had a first year too. And
Squad Con Diana Initiative on Monday, which I'm going to, which will be great. I mean, I think for me, that is the big part is it's more than DEF CON. It's more than Black Hat. It is where all the things are for
Cyber summer camp.
Besides LV,
Yeah. Well, Ryan, I think I might choose you as the winner this time, even though I don't fully agree with you. And I'll say the reason is that I do think it's good to know, like, if this is your first time at Defcon, to go into it with a good idea. Both. What? Mick is not happy with this decision.
You can appeal to me. You can appeal to our boss. There you go.
Well, I just, I appreciate different takes, but I disagree that DEF CON is not a cybersecurity conference because, when you're talking about exploits and stuff like that, it's all valuable to cybersecurity. But I can see why, if you're coming from, a blue team type point of view, it'd be good to know what you're going to see there. So that's why
it's no CanSec West.
Yes. So
biggest in the list.
Yeah. So yeah, that's, I guess.
I will happily donate to both of these myself, even if I did crush Mick today.
For one, did not. Look, I just
destroyed. Did you see her how fast she made that decision, Mick? There was no hesitation. It was like,
because we're going to move on. We're going to move on to our next segment and not talk about
voting. Anyone who doesn't know, this is probably the most uncomfortable thing that Audra goes through every 2 weeks. It's,
I mean, can you blame me? It's a tough call. And no matter what I say.
It's Drew Church in the background. He normally just immediately says who wins and lost. Like he's just very judgy.
Judgy.
He's a judgy,
or decisive.
You're more compassionate.
It's true.
You called me judgy earlier today on a call. you actually used that word to describe me on a call earlier today. So
your judgy eyes. It's true. I'm glad you didn't take that seriously.
Judges are wise. That's what he meant.
I'm judging you for backtracking.
Judging me. Uh-huh.
All right, let's do the deep dive.
And now we talk about things that just happen to be on our minds with who's ever here, because we made this up before I knew who'd accept my meeting invite.
All right, so I just shared a New York Times article that came out over the weekend. This is about, if you will recall, that Volt Typhoon report that came out from Microsoft, which essentially said that there are Chinese-backed threat actors who have installed malware on critical infrastructure, like telecommunications infrastructure in Guam. And that was the report, basically attributing it and speculating that it could possibly be pre-positioning for future escalations, say if China invades Taiwan or a situation like that, where China would then want to take advantage of access to U.S. critical infrastructure. So this report is kind of building on that and saying that the U.S. is basically hunting across the board for similar compromise. Right. So like any type of critical infrastructure could potentially be a target for Chinese interests. And how do you find it? What would be the end goal of accessing those networks? And so it was a really interesting article that there's, more information about this and what the big picture is. And so I'm curious, Mick, you have worked quite a bit with Chinese threat actors, just a little bit. What do you make of this? Is this surprising to you? Is this something that you've known for a while, but it's interesting that it's more publicly known?
I mean, I think it's something that everyone's who's looked at Chinese threat actors has known for a while. So to me, I read it and it's a fantastic article. There's plenty of information inside of it. And, from there, kind of pull that thread back and see what else you find. But it's, hey, water is wet. People's Republic of China collects intelligence to suit their national goals. And they're going to continue to do so for about 16 more years, maybe, I think. And we'll see what happens then. So, Yeah. But it's fascinating. And I think it just kind of illustrates Chinese operations. But the article itself was fantastic, but I didn't really glisten like this wasn't like a 2016 election, that we attributed to Russian actors or the 2020, the election interference attempts by Iranian threat actors. It was just China put stuff. It seemed like a plug and play with the Guam article we read a few months back.
Right. Well, I'm curious because I saw some conversations on Twitter about this saying that.
I'm sorry, where were you?
On Twitter? Oh,
What?
wait. Oh, gosh. That's going to take a while for me to get used to. X, when I was on X.
You wouldn't share.
Wait, which website though? I know you just assigned a variable, but which specific social media?
When I was on X website,
I followed up with Y.
I
and then
came across a discussion about what nation state presents or country, right? We had this conversation at Conf. It's not a nation state, but what country presents the largest threat in terms of cybersecurity to the United States? Obviously, we had SolarWinds, we had targeting of elections and disinformation campaigns, whatnot, attributed to Russia. So there was a lot of focus on Russia for a long time with those two big national news stories. And do you think that China has kind of flown under the radar in terms of being the greatest threat, or do you think that that's been established for a while? It just hasn't been as much of a talking point because there hasn't been a SolarWinds.
We talked about this, in our pre-call a bit, and I've said this on the show before. The joke in the DC Cyber Tribe was always, if you going back 10 or 15 years now, showing age, but it was if it was ridiculous, then it was probably Iranian. If you caught it, it was Chinese, and if you found out about it from the FBI, it was Russia, and that was like
scanning. If it was scanning, it was Iranian.
Yeah, if it was scanning, it was Iran. It was a Havid or Acunetics.
Right. Yep.
Iranian. And we always joke about that, but the reality is China.
I didn't think so. I'm not like, I'm smarter than everybody else. But when you look at China as just a larger umbrella and that's all you focus on, when you have an AOR, right, and your AOR is as broad as China is overall, you have to learn about the national strategy. And that's why we keep harping that policy gets so important to pay attention to. Like it's a 100-year plan broken up into 5-year chunks, and you see operations the way they're structured and designed kind of fit that narrative. And that's just, you look at the 2015 agreement and what was covered and what wasn't covered, and the 2015 agreement, President Obama, President Xi at the time, what was covered. Hey, we won't hack this. Hey, this is still okay. And intelligence, as far as I know, really wasn't covered under that. It was okay, you can still hack. So when you have a country where everything is pretty much structured as a national intelligence goal, everything becomes fair game.
One of the, Mick, with your background, we talk. I personally think there's a lot of bias towards Russia in terms of interest because they tend to align more with traditional Western military operations of just how we think about politics, how we think about geopolitics, various aspects there. One of which, of course, is when we talk about the GRU, when we talk about the SVR, the FSB, we can immediately say things like, oh, this one is just like the CIA. This one is just like the DIA. This one is just like the FBI. And then underneath those, you have different cybersecurity groups that are tasked.
So I think you still kind of do that with the Chinese umbrella. For me, I think, and this is just my opinion, just because I love this, what we do here is just, we're not really experts, but let me put my armchair right here.
Let me weigh in.
Have a real job. But.
So for me, I think it goes back to you and I, kind of grew up 80s babies, right? Where there was still that big, bad communist bear, and that was Russia. So it's just that's the bad guy that a lot of people are super familiar with. Like Rambo didn't really fight Chinese at all in any of the movies. It was just all the Soviets and Burr and the helicopter that he shot down with a bow and arrow that one time. But when you look at China, the equivalents are essentially, you have the MSS, the Ministry of State Security. And that I essentially would have put, and this is the oversimplification, right? The equivalent of the CIA, right? That is larger your intelligence apparatus. And on the other side, you have the PLA, the People's Liberation Army. And then underneath the People's Liberation Army is the People's Liberation Air Force, the Navy, the different groups that kind of still fall under the PLA. And then SSF.
People's Liberation Space Force.
Well, the SSF is new, and that's the Strategic Support Force, and that was just created to kind of do the 2015 to strictly the cyber operations. And then you have contractors, which may do their own business on the side, and then you have state-owned enterprises, which, like I mentioned, the intelligence collection earlier. If you're let's say a natural resource company that works within the confines of China, it would really help you out if the Chinese government took an interest in making sure you were doing well because you support the government.
Yeah. Well, the thing we were talking about before the show might be worth talking about now is, with Russia, like you mentioned, we have all these distinct groups and we have names associated. We have Cozy Bear, we have Sandworm, we have names that are very recognizable. Whereas it's like, what is the Sandworm of China? Is it Volt Typhoon now that we have that naming that just came out in the last month or so?
See, I think we've had it for a while. Ryan, would you put anything like, hey, what's the equivalent?
I mean, obviously, it's the obvious one is APT1, right?
Right. Unit 61398.
Yeah. Or, Camera Shy, my personal favorite. Let's go into Facebook photos. Dicom.
But OPM, was it OPM that was attributed to AT? Somebody in the comments, if you're paying attention at home, keep me honest. But I think it was OPM was attributed to APT 41, right? Or Turbine Panda. I think it was that.
Maybe it was WinNT. Hard to keep up.
But I guess what I'm
Chinese
saying.
attribution. Go ahead.
Well, it's just from my point of view, and I'm not as well versed on all of the different groups, but from what I've seen, there's been a lot more of a clear outline of Russia, clustering, right? Clustering of activity groups. Whereas in China, you'll hear words like Volt Typhoon, but it just says PRC state sponsored. And so it doesn't say if this is under a certain wing or if there's a specific, like we know with Turla that they're very advanced in their exploits and they've used satellites and blah, blah, blah. We hear all this stuff that it's easy to pinpoint to specific groups. But when I hear Volt Typhoon, it's just broadly associated with the Chinese government, right? So I guess that's what I'm trying to point out.
I honestly think part of this is media bias towards interesting of Russia aspects.
Right.
I mean, I certainly never, when I had a real job, like I did not think Chinese APT threats were less significant. They were very strong. They were very everywhere. And at one point, I distinctly remember reading that there were more people in offensive cyber operations in China than the U.S. Marine Corps. Like the scale is just so vast. And we were talking about this. There's a great report by Michael Raggi at Cyber WarCon talking about South China Sea operations. And like
they built an island and a whole chain of them.
And they have entire APT cyber operations focus on regions of South China Sea to basically understand and like primarily around gathering information for nations that some of them are very small, like Micronesia, but they impact that. And they have entire offices dedicated to this in like Henin Island that are just focused on this one thing. Or the other one, Mustang Panda, which a lot of people don't know about. But like Mustang Panda used to be only doing Mongolian like intelligence gathering. And then they switched targeting to Eastern Europe with Ukraine because of recent changes of how Ukraine was working with aligned or not aligned with Chinese interests. And like just the scale is stunning. So for me, it's less than, I think that there's an observation bias because of the election of the U.S. political system looking at Russia as the big bad evil. And we are allies is a strong word, but we have a much stronger economic shared interest with China.
Yeah, and I guess you could say like intellectual property theft is not as big of a news headline when it does happen because it right, but compared to SolarWinds or compared to the election,
I can think of some fighter jet manufacturers who would disagree, but
in terms of impact, but I'm talking about in terms of public, interest, right?
It's
like
material.
By 1,000 cut strategy, and
exactly.
When you look at hey, this is Sandworm. This is this group that we know about that's carried out these operations. Okay. But when you look at Chinese cyber operations, you look at the groups responsible behind them, whether you call it activity clusters or intrusion sets, whatever that name is, there's a sheer volume of China. To Ryan's point, there's so many more you have to track. It's not just Sandworm as a group. It's 30 Sandworms that all do small things individually. So because the OPM links, the Anthem attack, the USPS attacks, those weren't all by the same group, it doesn't mean it doesn't go to the same organization, that same data bank at the end of the day. And that's why I think people overlook China as a cyber threat.
And this would actually be an interesting research project, but in my mind, there's been more people listed by the FBI top 10 from APT groups from China than Russia. Like the immediate comes to mind is Wang Dong and Ugly Gorilla, which once again was APT1. But I
think Anthem was 4 contractors, Chinese contractors that were convicted that had officially no ties to state government. And I think it was OPM that was Turbine Panda. But yeah, to your point, it's those small little things.
I will say I do like on the FBI most wanted page under cyber, you have headshots and then just Iranian cyber actors.
Yep.
And then some very stylish Russians, which is nice. Igor Deklohilkak, like that guy has a great fur coat. I'm going to assume ransomware. Yes. There we go. Anywho.
Well, see you kids in the desert next week. If you're around, find us. Please stop by the Black Hat booth. We are going to be hanging out there. We're going to be streaming Coffee Talk and who knows what else.
Yeah, definitely should wrap up, especially looking at comments. Everyone have a wonderful day. Drew, take us away.
Surge.